So, welcome everybody to another exciting adventure into Frozen in Time. Today we have the amazing, incredible Doria Cordova. We're going to be exploring her life story, understanding more about like what it is that got her to where she is today, and all the teachable moments along the way, so that we can melt together into this wholeness, this unity, right? Because right now we're these frozen blocks with all of our trauma, and we're just getting moved around the board. And if we melt, we get to choose where we go on the board. And that's what we're here for. So I'm really excited to go deep with Doria today and see where we end up. Before we get started with your life story, I'd like to just kind of set the stage with two quick questions. The first question is, what does trauma mean to you?
Now you're asking me that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What is your definition of trauma? It just helps to kind of set the stage for people that are going in.
For me, trauma is actually something that affects you so deeply emotionally, and it creates like a scar, and what we call in Money and You a yuck berry,
Mm-hmm.
And then there will be things that will happen just in the process of life itself, and it kind of like reactivates them, and it's like having a scab, and it's like picking at the scab. You're wanting it, the hurt to be cleared up, but somebody's just pulling at the scab constantly. So then again, you get like re-traumatized. So it's really an incident that just keeps reoccurring.
Okay, awesome. And then that moves us to our next one. What is healing?
And healing is when you are able to be with. You are now in balance. You can now see whatever the incident was, whatever it happened that was hurtful, that you can see it from a place of much more neutrality and understanding. And I'm a Ho'oponopono practitioner. And so from a Ho'oponopono place, knowing that that particular event, that particular trauma happened for a reason, and I've been able to successfully take a lesson from that and be able to reconcile that incident so that I am now able to be present. And even though I can look back at that incident, like when my boyfriend was killed, I now see that that was one of the greatest gifts. Of course, for the first 20 years, I didn't see that. But the healing, when you heal that deeply with such a big loss, is profoundly life-changing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's kind of the difference between like when you have the flu and then the day after the flu when you're healed and you're like, oh, I didn't know I could even feel this good. It's incredible, right?
Yes.
And that's one of those things where as we progress through life, we take on all this weight that we don't realize. And then when we finally get to unburden ourselves in those breakthrough moments, we actually start to feel better. So that's perfect for setting the stage for the next question that I'm going to ask. So you have gone through so much in your life to get to the chair that you're currently sitting in. And I'd love to hear like where you started to how you got here, any of the teachable moments that you feel are really important to share around your journey to that chair.
I'm going to make it as short as possible, but
you can make it as long as you want. We'll take it clip by clip and go through teachable moments, how you overcame it, and we'll just keep expanding until our time is up. It'll be a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you. So I was born in Chile in November of 1949. So the world itself was going through a very good time. It was after World War II, and there was prosperity around the world. So I was raised with a beautiful, beautiful mama that was a single mama in the 50s that owned her own beauty salon.
Wow.
And that we could speak about for hours, because that was the place where my grandmother was raising me. My father had been lovingly escorted out of the home when I was 3 years old for many reasons, and something I got to heal with him many years later. And because I did not want to have a father, I adopted a father. I had a father next door, my daddy next door, that was actually quite successful and also taught me a lot of really good things. And but the biggest thing as a child was having this beautiful woman that had this salon, and she understood leverage and the business success principles that we teach in Money and You, except there's no way she could have articulated that, nor myself, until decades later. And she had, she would rent out spaces and and have a percentage of what each beautician made. And it was a place of joy. And I got to be a cashier from the time I was 5 years old. So that allowed for me to be able to get very comfortable with money. And of course, the people were very honest. And if I had any problem, I would just call mama. But I didn't have any problem. I was very young dealing with money. And I did that throughout until I was probably 11, 12 years old. And so I grew up in Chile. Mama married a man that had become from a very powerful business background, but they lost all their money. And the United States had a calling all over the world for immigrants. And so we came to the United States when I was 12. And by the way, in those days, you got a green card in 3 months. They wanted you to have a green card, and very quickly, very, very organized, very beautifully done. And we had grew up typical California. We went to Los Angeles, typical teenager. And this is where the trauma began to occur, which is that when I was 18 years old, and in the 60s, in 1968, you married at 18. You
Oh,
married very young. Yes. So I was going to be married in April 26, 1968. And my boyfriend was killed in March 27th. And it was this horrific experience. And we had not really been intimate together too many times. But you're so fertile at 18 years old. I didn't know until a couple of months later that I was actually pregnant. And his
whoa.
birthday was on July 17th. And I miscarried his baby probably half an hour after midnight. So I miscarried his baby on July 18th. And that pretty much just closed me down, because it was like two losses in like 4 months. And I just, and the major decision at that time was, I am just not going to feel. So for the next 8 years, I became
Wow.
a total workaholic, so that I didn't have to feel anything. And it was the 70s, late 60s, Vietnam War, suicides, drug overdoses. So I lost an additional 13 friends and had one more miscarriage when I was 21, because I wasn't meant to have my own babies. And I have, many adopted around the world. And now in the 3 year span, there was so much pain, it would just get activated. That scab would get reopened, open. And I partied hardy, because it was the 70s, not feeling, and ended up going into the legal system because I felt so helpless. And so I was going to go to college. I did go to college for a degree in languages, because I had a vision that I was going to be part of this thing called uh, it was a body that looked like the UN, the United Nations. But um, so all I could think about, and this is important, Jason, because I could only see myself as an interpreter. I didn't see myself as a speaker or as a leader of it, nothing. And so I followed that vision, and I was going to be an interpreter. I was going to go to the UN. I was going to go an interpreter there. And in the process of learning languages, so I had Spanish and Italian in college, I ran into, I was working in a law firm, and this man would bring all these people that were interpreters. And I found out how much money they were making. And I said, I'm fluent in Spanish, I'm fluent in English, I'm going to be an interpreter, and began to make a lot of money, $50 a session in 1970, 71. Do you know how much money that was?
It
And
doesn't sound like much now, but back then I'm sure it was probably like a lot more. I don't even know the math on the difference.
probably $500, $600.
Okay, so 10 times roughly. Yeah.
Yeah, because think of it, the number of years, right? And so now we're looking at, I'm an interpreter, and I start seeing these court reporters, and also I was going to night school. I was a total workaholic. I had like 3 jobs, had full curriculum in college, plus I was a cheerleader and I was a reporter for the newspaper,
Wow.
and I had a boyfriend.
Whoa.
Um, I had no time to think. There
Yeah.
was no time to feel, no time to think. And I saw this little stenotype machine, and I thought, and I did research. I've always loved research. I have to learn everything. That's why I was a good reporter and a good researcher. And I found out how much money they made, how much prestige they had, and they worked in court. They worked with police. They worked with, clerks and attorneys and judges. I was going to be protected from the meanness of the world, and pretty much started being a I went to court reporting school. Did it very quickly in 3 years. I was out of there by the time I was 24. Became an official court reporter, close to 25 years old. So I ended up in the criminal court system as an official court reporter with a badge, with the ability to arrest people, part of the system. And I began to see now that at that time, and it has all been cleaned up. Let's make this very, very clear. The LAPD is one of the cleanest police departments on the planet. Okay. But at that time, they had a bunch of Vietnam veterans that were perfect to be policemen, but they didn't realize that these boys, they were all men. We didn't really have women coming back from the Vietnam War, except nurses and doctors. They were addicted. They were, and so now I began to see this pattern, and it freaked me out. And what does a girl does when she's gorgeous? Almost she's 25 years old. She goes to Hawaii. I ran away to Hawaii, became an official court reporter in Oahu, then Maui, the first official court reporter in Maui, and began the journey of healing. I had an enlightenment experience at 26, right before I turned 27, on the island of Kauai, while I was a sailing bum, and I was at the best life. But all of a sudden, I found myself sober for the first time in about a month. And all of a sudden, it just enough for spirit to just kind of like, whoa. And at 26 years old, I had this experience where I didn't hear it, but I had this feeling that I was not put on planet Earth to be a party girl and to just have a job, but that I had a job to do. I had no idea what that meant. Within 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, I moved away to Oahu, and my first case was the state of Hawaii versus the Est organization for practicing psychology without a license. And Est was the predecessor of Landmark Education.
Okay.
And the most successful human potential program at the time. And then I'll break a little here because it'll be a good time to break. But this is the program where I now found out that I had no control over anything, nothing. Not really. People could die, wars could start, people could kill themselves, accidents happen. But I had only one control, one area, and that was my consciousness. Yeah. And it was there at 26 that I committed that I would spend the rest of my life handling, clearing, managing, growing my consciousness. And so we can stop there.
Perfect. Well, I mean, you gave me a lot to work with. So let's go back to the beginning, where you were born into an immigrant world, right? Like that's already going to be a completely different experience. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are similar in that are watching, that are like, hey, I was born an immigrant. That's why I have this chip on my shoulder. These things aren't working for me, things like that, right? Because like what I like to do with these is make it relatable. Go back in time and say, hey, like, so no matter how you're born, no matter what life you were given, no matter the struggles that you have or anything, you can accomplish something with your life. That's the goal of what I do with these talks is I bring these people on that have had lives that chose in every moment, at least now, maybe not at the time, right? Because we all make mistakes, but like that chose to do something with their life instead of to become a slave to society or to become a burden. And one thing that I've seen with you, which now that I know like a lot more about your history, you had a lot of opportunities to just say, oh no, I'm going to stay numb. I'm gonna become somebody else's problem. I don't really need to do anything. I'm a gorgeous young woman. I'm capable of just letting other people take care of me for the rest of my life. And yet here you are as an amazingly powerful woman in this world because you chose consciously and constantly. Because again, it's not just a one-time choice, right? You don't just go,
Yes,
oh, I'm going to be an amazing woman in this world, and that's that. And then that's the one time. That's it. No, it's every day, every moment you choose to overcome what the life that you live brings to you, right? Like that's the magic
correct.
of it. So for those people out there that are struggling with the victimhood of being an immigrant currently, what is some advice that you have for those people?
Well, the first thing is because I was there for 12 years in Chile. I was already grounded in high self-esteem, and a mother that had made, she kept telling me how successful I was going to
Oh, that's
be.
awesome.
If you didn't have that, then what I highly recommend is that you recreate your childhood. Tom Robbins, a great writer from the 70s, he wrote some great books. And one of them was Still Life with Woodpecker. It was this funny book. Tom Robbins. He's the famous guy that said at the end of the book, it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
Yep.
I read that in the 70s. And so you can, through the healing, through the process, through the processes that we do in Money and You, and then also with all the work that I've done with all these processes, and this is one around money that I immediately want to send people to fridayswithdoria.com, and under the resources, you can actually find, in the tab resources, you can find the magical exercises where you recreate your experience of money by clearing the patterns from your family, your mother's most negative thoughts, your father's, the community, church, school, the world, your workplace. So it's like, for me, my saving grace when I look back was self mastery. And just remember, I had not read any books or knew any of this. When I grew up, there were no podcasts, no books like we have now. The first book I read was a little book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It's a little tiny book. And I highly recommend that you read that. It's tiny book. It's so good. Then somebody gave me Cybernetics, another book, which was one of the first famous book on rewiring your brain.
Hmm.
And then the third book that made a huge difference for me was Think and Grow Rich. So what we have to do is, remember, we have the superconscious, and then we have the conscious mind, then we have the subconscious, and then we have the unconscious. And so the subconscious is very easy to pull out whatever knowledge you have, because you can say, my most negative thoughts about money are, and then you start writing, and the magical exercises will show you this beautiful process that you'll want to do and for the rest of your life. And by the way, I have to say this to you, Jason, you are one of the most clear people that I have ever met around money. I just feel like I know a little bit about where you come from, but I have to tell you that whatever it was that was going to be a negative thought about money did not stick in your consciousness because of the channel that you are, your understanding of money. And that is a goal that we all should have, so that money becomes really neutral and only used as a tool.
Yeah.
So if I go back, then for me was also, what I recommend to you is that you become fluent in English. This is really important, because immediately, like in our program, sometimes we have these instructors that speak 4 different languages fluently, 4 languages. So they have accents in all the languages because they're fluent in all 4 of them. So I tell people in the United States, particularly, I say to them, this person speaks 4 languages, therefore you're going to hear this accent. And and then everybody kind of relaxes. But in most people's minds, when you don't use grammar correctly, or you have a very heavy accent, there's judgments that come. So it's like life, you have to dress the part, you have to sound the part, you have to look the part, and not because you're trying to show off, but these are just tools that we have that allows us to be able to present that which we want to present to the world. And as an immigrant, I a lot of times what I see, and this is something that I teach in Singapore, Malaysia, because I spend so much time in the Asia Pacific region. Um, you can't go into pidgin English. You can do that with your family and your friends, but and one of the things also is that my mentor was the one, because I was gonna be an interpreter. I was an interpreter, and I was going to be a court reporter. He gave me. He's an angel now, John Rafa. He gave me this vocabulary cards, and every day I learned a new big word. And Anamanapoya was my first one. And my first big word. And I began to educate myself. But what happened was that I began to tool up. I began to power up with things outside of myself that allowed me to present myself the way that I wanted to as a professional. And then it's like I could feel that not that I felt very judged, but believe me, it was the 70s. I was young, I was beautiful, I was, I looked a little bit, little bit big here, a little very small in the waist. I was in those days, if you look like me, you were considered automatically dumb. And
Oh,
and then I just want to tell you something, because I'm pretty street savvy and I grew up well. I went, oh, they want to think that I'm dumb? Let them think that I'm dumb. I actually use that. And even to this day, I mean, I have had incidents like a few years ago when I went to Antarctica. Some guy says to me, oh, you must have really enjoyed the polar bears in Antarctica. And I stopped and I go, excuse me? He says, oh, you must have really enjoyed the polar bears in Antarctica. And I said, you do know that there are no polar bears in Antarctica, right?
that's what I actually thought. Yeah.
And
Okay.
he says, yeah, well, I know, but I didn't know whether you knew. And I said, oh, so you actually think that I just made up going to Antarctica? It's like I made up all those pictures and all the people. And I mean, is that what you think? And he goes, well, I just wonder. And I said, okay. I said there were a lot of penguins, and I just like I think we're going to cut this conversation a little short. I'm not sure whether we belong in the same world, and I put him in a little bit of shock. So now I'm at a place. I think I must have been 68 or so then, that I can confront that. But it's like it's really interesting because intelligence is a highly rated commodity in this world. And I am a sapiosexualist. Now, if you don't know what that means, you know what that is, Jason?
I think that means that you love intelligence, right?
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
fall in love. A sapiosexualist falls in love with intelligence. And I love intelligence. And I feel like it's one of the most powerful tools that you can have is intelligence that you can provide yourself. Just remember that the brain works with connections.
Yep.
And the more that you can connect dots, the more intelligent that you are. So the more, like if we're not gifted the way that you are, Jason, the rest of us mortal beings have to read and learn and become intelligent. So I know this was a long answer, but that is what I recommend to children and to young people of immigrant status.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great answer. So I want to unpack a few things there. One, the amount of words that you know is in direct proportion to the amount of games that you're able to play. And this goes all the way back to quantum learning, where you understand that Spelling is to cast a spell. If you want to create reality, you have to use the words and the precision necessary to form that reality. So if you're going to express to somebody in another language and you're going to use parts of the language, it's going to be a lot harder to convey what you're wanting to convey. So what they've actually found, and they've done research on this, is that people that have a higher vocabulary have greater access to more fulfilling games, so to speak. And so I think that's an incredible one, because if you are going to go live somewhere, no matter whether you're like, if I were to move to Peru, I would go learn Spanish. Even though I don't really want to learn Spanish, I would go and learn Spanish because I would be living in Peru and I would want to convey and express and hold that space. So if I wasn't from America, I would have learned English because that would have made sense. And that's not saying that you have to learn English, but if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to convey who you are as a person properly, it's very beneficial to do that. So I think that that's really beautiful. And then the other thing is the practice you taught is what I call re-timelining, reimagining your childhood and then watching the ripples to now, seeing the different incidences and the other experiences that you would have had so that you can actually let go and heal those points of reference, right? Because again,
Yeah.
we are referencing ourselves in reality constantly. And that's what keeps us tied to or tethered to the past self and creates the trauma, because you aren't the same person that you were yesterday. And you will never be the same person that you were yesterday. It's physically impossible. But we reference yesterday to understand ourselves today. And that's a critical misstep that we have in our lives. So the ability to go back and reimagine that is the key. And the last point that I will touch on this before we move forward, because there's so much to unpack here that's so beautiful and great, is the point that you talked about where like you understand my understanding of money. And the reason is there's a core principle that I have that most people don't have. And it's the one thing that I think sets me aside with money. I don't believe I'm here to hoard resources. I came here to move them. You know,
Yes.
I believe very strongly that when I came to Earth, that Satan was holding the resources. I believe that. And whether people believe in Satan or God or all the other stuff, it doesn't matter. But that was my belief. I knew that I came here to a world where the majority of the resources were being hoarded and held by a force that wasn't the one that I came for. I didn't come here to work for that force. So the first thing that I thought about was like, okay, well, the key then is just to move those resources to the other side. I didn't care who got them. Didn't care whether it was me or Bob down the street or anything. As long as they were a God-centered good person, I was like, cool, let's get you some resources. Let's see what you do with them. And because that was like my point of view and my reference was we're all here as team humanity. We're not here as individuals in the same sense. I was able to kind of start to amass resources and pass them out to the right people and sometimes the wrong people. But resources, this is a fun one. When you hand somebody resources and they're not worthy of those resources, they show you really fast that they're not worthy of those resources. And so what's cool is if you want to learn, if you can trust somebody because they will show you whether you can't or not very fast, and then you can move forward. And my favorite thing in life, and this is one thing that most people would never want to say, but for me, this is my favorite thing in life. Knowing that somebody is now in my life is one of the most valuable things in the world. So if I give somebody all these resources and then they show me they can't handle them or that they don't want to play with me, I'm okay with it. I'm like, cool, I can let you go over here. Now I have room for the next great thing. Because the history of my life is that every time that I did everything in my power to do the right thing and go forward, when somebody was removed, they were replaced with something greater. When something was removed, it was replaced with something greater. Didn't matter what it was. And that's a quantum law, actually. That's how quantum magnetism works. So for me, that's my expression in life is just like, all you got to do is the best you can do and have faith that whatever needs to go away will, and whatever needs to come will, and just continue to do that. But remember that you're not here to hoard resources, because when things are hoarded, they actually start to become stagnant, which actually causes a negative frequency, not a positive frequency. And you can look at water to realize this, right? What does stagnant water do? It becomes negative. It becomes chaotic. Things start to infest it. Do you want your money infested? Do you want your life infested? No one wants that. Yet most of us are trying to hoard and hold because we have this belief in our minds of scarcity that isn't real. And we can go hours and hours and hours. And I'd love to go deep on those kind of things, but we don't want to go too far outside of Frozen in time. So we're going to come back to your life story and the journey that you've been on to get to where you are, because we have the best is yet to come in your story saga so far. So other than that experience with your immigration and that understanding, right? We also have the absentee father thing, and that's another archetype that a lot of people have experienced in this world, especially these days, right? And
Yes.
you chose, and this is a very important distinction that you mentioned, and I love it. I love distinctions; they're so important. You chose to create a new father. You had the opportunity to be, oh, woe is me, this is oh blah, but instead you realized, like, hey, wait a second, this person is actually everything I need in a father to learn from. So I'm going to go learn from this person and get those
Yes.
codes and get that movement forward. So I really love that point of reference, and I want to just kind of touch that really quick and see if there's anything else in follow up for those people out there that have an absentee parent that were raised by a single parent. Like, do you have any more advice for them on how to really shift that around, other than reimagining their life as if they had that, obviously?
A mentor. Just find a mentor. Just find somebody that can be like a father figure. It does help if that person is, old enough to be your parent,
Okay.
and find somebody who is very successful in the area that you want to be successful in. Have them be, 20, 30, 40 years older than you, and serve them. You don't start going to somebody that is very successful or is the epitome of what you want to be and start asking for things. You actually serve them. When the people that created the work that I inherited, I came in completely from service. I had saved enough. I was cushioned enough that I could go and serve them, and I did for a couple of years. And I ended up, inheriting. I mean, I had to prove myself for an additional 6 years, but I ended up inheriting the work of the greatest programs ever. So it's creating that, it's creating those relationships that can serve as a father figure. And before we move on, two quick things. You said something, I don't know if I ever told you this, Jason, but Buckminster Fuller had a famous saying. He used to love to say this, and we loved it, which was, there is no guarantee that the person who goes to sleep at night is the same person that wakes up in the morning.
Exactly.
Isn't that a beautiful saying? And that had to do with absolutely all the things that happen in our dream state and in our accelerated learning technology. Part of it is playing these big games at night so that people can then go to sleep and get the distinctions the next morning. So make sure that when you have a big problem, just don't go into major decisions, major reactions, but actually allow yourself to sleep a night and allow it to kind of like settle in a little bit. Just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love that. So we've kind of touched on a lot of your early phase of life, pre understanding and working on self mastery. I would love to hear the journey from self mastery to now.
That one is a total discipline that requires many things. And let's start with the physical. One of the things I love about you and your tribe is the sobriety aspect.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about sobriety, and this also relates to what you were sharing earlier about resources and about wealth and about money, is being sober and being neutral. Those are two very powerful words in self mastery. So when we are neutral, when we get to a place, and I think that's what happens with you on resources and money, you're just neutral. You know what they're going to be used for. Well, most of us are not neutral about it. So and sobriety, what happened for me was that I started working on myself. I have the enlightenment experience. I go to the Estes, which became Landmark Education, and they were bringing around Buckminster Fuller, and Buckminster Fuller was, and it is in YouTube, the 8-hour conversations between Werner Erhard and Buckminster Fuller are in YouTube. You can actually find it. Werner, Werner, Erhard, EHARDT, easy to find. And basically, Buckminster Fuller gets brought in, and they had just started, barely started, the Hunger Project. And Buckminster Fuller starts talking about the Malthusian theory of economics in the world, which was appropriate at the time, which is the management of scarce resources by governments, by banks, by financial institutions, insurance institution. Pretty much the world runs on this. And by the early 70s, that was no longer the truth. That theory had dissipated. It was no longer true, except to this day. To this day, 2023, the world is still functioning from that. But when Bucky said that in 1977, and I believe it was around February that I saw him, just, whoa, my world just like, oh my God, I have to work on sufficiency. Okay, sufficiency. Do I have enough? And coincidentally, I had already decided I was still working as a full-time court reporter, and I was very successful in Honolulu. I was one of the best because to be a certified shorthand reporter in California, you have to pass a test with 99.5 accuracy on
Wow.
the testimony, on spelling, on punctuation. I mean, we're talking perfection just about.
Mm.
And so in Hawaii, I was very professional because I had been in the criminal court system where only the best were there. So I had a great reputation. I was making lots of money, and all of a sudden I now start feeling that I need to go look for my job. And then Buckminster Fuller talks about sufficiency and eradicating hunger on the planet. That was the hunger project. And it was about this big, hairy, audacious goal. And it was so big. And we were also talking about responsibility. And he's taking 100% responsibility for that particular problem, that world problem, the way that you take full responsibility, Jason, for the whole aspect of energy. I mean, this is why I love you, because you like freaking, if anybody's going to change this, it's going to be me. The fact that there is many others also working on that is wonderful. But when you take responsibility at that level, and I didn't know that I was doing that, it's amazing for a 27-year-old, gorgeous, young Latina woman doing that. But see, I had the environment of all these people that were now enforcing and reinforcing the thought that I had to take, that I could only change my consciousness. That's what self-mastery is. And then no matter what was happening, then the masters come in. You know, that poem Commitment. I think we still hand it out at Money and You. Commitment. Commitment is that one thing that once you decide, you know, like the whole universe conspires to go ahead and give you that. And so now I have, oh, maybe that's my job, to eradicate hunger. And then, of course, within a year, I meet the people that created the first business school for entrepreneurs of its kind, mega successful in real estate, mega successful in applying human potential movement principles in San Francisco, were the darlings of the consciousness business world, making $150,000 a month, 4 partners, 600,000 a month, net cash. Then everybody was in profit sharing, but it was now a combination. It had been an experiment, because every human being is an experiment. Every organization is an experiment. And that's why entrepreneurs need to fail constantly, because we are experiments. It's like the first experiment is not going to be the perfect one. So now they become this experiment, and they had literally hundreds and hundreds of people that wanted to work there. And they decided to do the first business school for entrepreneurs, left Hawthorne Stone, the real estate company, did a 6-week business school, which I attended. And it was all through the Hunger Project, because I was in Honolulu working when I did Estes, and then Buckminster Fuller. And now, long story on how I ended up going to this first business school, but it was all through the Hunger Project. And now we go to the school, and I find out that all those 8 years in the legal field were the groundedness, it's a new word, the basis, the foundation of business, of law, of rules of the game, like right here, rules of the games, policies, the fruit bowl right here, in Money and You, we talk about Buckminster Fuller and the fruit bowl theory of business, the context. My context was already set that I needed to create a big vision, except I didn't know it. And that the fruits were knowledge, expertise, money, and just proof, resources, all of that. And I excelled in the business school. I'm asking for, I moved from Honolulu to San Francisco. I am volunteering, serving, and I keep asking, can you create something that I can have a job? I'm looking for a job. And I have plenty of money. I don't need to be paid. So just give me something that I can create. And they did. People kept asking for a shorter program instead of the business school for entrepreneurs being 6 weeks long, if they could do a shorter program. And from there, they had the Money and You. They decided to do a 5-day program with the leftovers that they didn't play except for one game in the business school. And by now, they had already learned from the world's leading learning suggestopedia expert, Georgi Lasanoff, about experiential learning. And now Money and You is going to be this experiential learning experiment on teaching entrepreneurship. Not a lot of logistics yet, the way that we ended up creating. That was my job. And I'm a Money and You graduate by February 1979. I was invited to go see if I liked this program and it could be my job. And you can imagine, Jason, you can imagine. I was crying. Of course, I love this. And the way that it was named, they were all out to dinner with a group, and they said, "Oh, what are you going to call this program?" And he goes, "Well, it's going to be about money. It's going to be about you. Let's call it Money and You." I mean, one of the greatest names ever. It gets created over dinner, and he was there. And all this time, I was working on the magical exercises that I mentioned earlier. I was clearing my deservability. There's something that happens when you change, when you go from being a professional that gets paid for a product or service, but now you are going to be of service yourself. You commit your life for the betterment of humanity. All of this stuff came up, that all this undeservability, these thoughts like, who in the hell do you think you are? You think you're going to eradicate hunger on the planet? Really? I mean, self-doubt, fears. I'm like, oh, and that's where the magical exercises came from, but also rebirthing, clearing, breath, affirmations, and reading. I'm now reading A Course in Miracles. I'm reading Catherine Ponder. I'm listening to Reverend Ike. I'm like infusing myself with this new reality. That's what self-mastery looks like. I am freaking committed. And then from there, I end up now with this beautiful program called Money and You. And then the following summer, that February is winter in America. And in July, there was the second business school for entrepreneurs. And then something tragic happened there where the partners lost everything because of a glitch that happened with the stock options of Chicago. Long story. I ended up taking Marshall Thurber, the creator of it, and Bobby DePorter, Marshall Thurber on the road with Money and You. By the end of the year, by November 21st, 1979, I was 50% owner of Money and You, and then became a partner. And 5 years later, I fully inherited the work. All self-mastery. When I began to see that the more that I worked on myself, the more that the physical reality was shifting. Oh, and in the middle of all of that, to test the principles, I decided to do the most difficult thing in the world, to meet Fidel Castro. I don't think you know that story. The way I met Fidel Castro, he was the biggest bad guy on the planet. He had brought the Russians to America. The thing that happened with Kennedy, we almost had a nuclear war over that, all this and that. Everybody hated Fidel Castro. And I thought it would be really interesting. I would see whether the principles really work. Long story short, I met him on April 3rd, on Marshall Thurber's birthday, 1984. I was sitting across from Fidel Castro. And as I was watching him speaking to us, and that's a whole other story. We got to have a whole program on that. And I realized, Holy Mother of God, these principles actually work. And he was the beginning. He was the model. And this is important for you all to know, that people will show you the way. There will be incidents, there will be occurrences that will show you your next road, which was for me to work with leaders, with leverage leaders. But I had to work my way to it. And I didn't start really working with my next major leader until 1989. So it took like 5 years. So it is absolutely essential for you to recognize those points where you now have just been pivoted to like take a look at this. And now that you have people like me, like Jason, that can guide you, you now must pay attention. And the whole time was self-mastery.
It sounds like your journey is a lot about faith. Like you had faith in yourself and your own capabilities of consciousness. You continued to create more and more room as you cleaned up who you were, the misunderstandings of yourself. And then more opportunity came to you. And then more opportunity came to you. And then more opportunity came to you. And then each time that opportunity came to you, more misunderstandings in yourself came up as well, right? Like what I've
Correct.
found is whenever we choose Team Humanity, we actually say, hey, we're here to be of service. We're not here to hoard resources. We're not here to be something else. We're here to like work as a team. That's when everything comes out of the woodwork to try to get us to stop that, to step off that team. And I applaud the fact that you actually were willing to go into that. Most people, when they are hit with that experience, they choose the easy option. And every time in your journey that I've heard so far, you chose the harder option. Especially like that Fidel Castro story is a perfect example. Like to be willing to test yourself, to be willing to express the truth of who you were in a moment and then see what actually occurred from it. That's the definition of experiments, right? Like that's what I live my life for too, is like, okay, but am I really what I think I am? Let's find out. Oh, I was. Cool. Am I really what I think I am? Let's find out. Oh, I wasn't. Cool. Let's let that go, move this over here, and move forward again. And that ability is self mastery, that ability to not take it personal, not to get lost in it, but rather to what can I learn from this? How can I move forward from this? And your whole story of like how you got to where you are, I see all these turning points for you where you're like, okay, well, what can I learn? Okay, well, what can I learn? Okay, well, what can I learn? And so it just makes sense that you would end up with one of the greatest programs I've ever taken in my life, probably one of the most important things anyone does, right? And being like the leader of that movement of Money in You, because I don't consider Money in You like just a program like everybody else might see it as one. I see it as a movement. It's
It,
something that's so important because if I were to say the most traumatizing thing in the world right now, and this has lost me so many followers in the past, is money itself. Like anytime that I talk about money in any way, shape, or form, people get really irritated and unfollow. And I actually love it when it happens because these kind of expressions and these kind of conversations, they bring up those things for you. And you get a choice on whether you want to allow that trigger to move you away from what you're wanting or that trigger to let you see what you're ready to let go of so that you can move towards what you want. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on today, was so that we could talk about this, because the program that you have, the life that you've lived, all of it, it perfectly syncs up to show the real you. And it's just an amazing thing to see what you've accomplished and what you continue to accomplish. And this is just the beginning. I really do believe that you will be one of the people that helps end world hunger because you're passionate about it. You put energy towards it. You don't just talk about it. And you meet with people, you do programs, you support these things. You have all of this stuff that you're doing. And that's the difference between a talker and a doer. And you're both. You can talk and do, but you don't just do one or the other. And that's something that is what self-mastery looks like, in my opinion. Is it's great to theorize, but you got to get on the ground and actually do stuff too. And you do both. Every day you're constantly doing stuff. Money in You has been taught more times than I remember at this point. Tons of people have graduated. You've taken your program and you've brought it into the world in a way that is constantly changing and creating greater leaders. And that is something that I applaud you for, because to be able to do that, to be able to see so clearly, hey, this is what I'm here to do. And then to let go of the ego that says that, oh, but I'm not actually doing this, because you're helping others unlock their potential to do that, to stay in your lane and to be in that focus. It's an incredible thing to be in the presence with you and to see and to talk about and express. And I know that we're coming up on the hour, so I want to honor the fact that we are getting close to the end here. Is there anything that you like just are like, wow, okay, this is something I've really got to express. I really want to help people to see this one more thing, this one more technology, this tool, whatever it is, or a book that you really recommend for people that are understanding or experiencing trauma, especially related to money, because that's your expertise, like trauma related to money and really helping them to see clearly around that. I think that's one of those things that I'd love to hear more about from you.
Okay. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about another person first, and then I'll talk about my books. My favorite ever money book ever is by a wild Englishman that lived in Australia called Stuart Wilde. He's actually passed on now.
Yeah,
And
he
the
was a
book,
great guy.
oh my God. The book is called The Trick to Money is Having Some. The Trick to Money is Having Some. Best money book. And pretty much the book, the core of the book is just get off your butt. It's like money is just a freaking tool. Just stop giving all the meaning. But he's such a funny writer. I ended up meeting him in the year 2000. I was, oh my God, I had no idea who he was. And we went to see him live. And then, of course, I had to buy that book. I couldn't believe it. I became a devotee. I read most of his books. He is amazing. And he died young and relatively young because he was a wild man, you know?
Yeah.
Good name, Stuart Wilde.
He lived up to it for sure.
Yeah, he definitely lived up to it. So the other thing is that I definitely want people to go to accesstocashbook.com. There's a gift there. I love to give gifts. And in there, it has a link to the Amazon link. And for $9.97, I think, the basic to just cover the cost, you can go ahead and read Access to Cash. Now, this is really important. Access is the new definition of wealth.
Yeah.
Access to cash, to investments, to expertise, to knowledge, to distinctions, to support. And this is what I love about you and Skylar and Jeremy and the whole team. And I'm so, so pleased that Tom Chesser introduced us. I will be forever grateful to him, and just encourage you to come to Money and You. So you know because of you and because of all these other people, I have so much more wealth. The same thing you all listening right now, and I know many of you are going to be listening to this replay. Many of my friends are asleep right now, my graduates, and they are going to come in and watch it. Thank you. I feel that my wealth has really grown because I get to know you. Your wealth has really grown because you get to know me and my network. Follow us in Facebook. I have so much free education. And this is the thing, you have so much access. So make a list of all the things that you have access to, and that you get started with this particular beautiful movement, because Jason recognizes me leading a movement because he's leading a movement. And the world has moved from organizations to platforms to movements. And so we are now collaborating together. They have their own thing. I have my own thing. All my other friends have their own thing. But we collaborate with supporting each other's movement. So you can go to my Facebook. DC Cordova is under my own name that people call me DC. DC Cordova is in Facebook, and you can find me everywhere. Google me, you'll find me everywhere. But I want you to download the headline, How do we make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without any ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone? That's Buckminster Fuller's question to us. When you answer that question with a product or service, the likelihood of your success is going to exponentially grow. It will just grow so huge because you're now kicking in generalized principles. Okay. So, to give you an example, a generalized principle is gravity. I don't care who you are, you jump off anything, you're going to land on the ground. Gravity is gravity. Unless you are on the water, in the ocean, in a pool, gravity will be pulling you. The other one is leverage. Leverage is a tool that Buckminster Fuller, one of our mentors, and our work is based on the teachings of five masters. And so if you go to moneyandyou.com, you can download the Business Success Model book, which you should also read. All of you should read. It's a little tiny book, but in there's also, right above Bobby D. Porter, the co-founder of this work, there is a 26-minute video on the history of this work. And I want you to learn where we come from because that's really important. But this organization has put leverage on the map, and Buckminster Fuller taught us to learn from nature, learn from physics, and apply that to human behavior. So we teach leverage up the gazoo. We love leverage. Leverage is key in creating wealth and in creating movements and in creating the results that you want. Then the last principle that I'll mention today, there's many. The last principle is precession. And precession is the physics of ripple effects. So the bigger that you make the goal, mine was to eradicate hunger, the 90-degree effects, the precessional effects, the ripple effects is going to be money if you create an economic engine around your life purpose. So you create that engine, understanding the business success model, understanding, of course, the teachings of Buckminster Fuller in Money and You, the fruit bowl theory of business, and also understanding that whether you believe in them or not, generalized principles are constantly running your life. This is where Jason, you can go to Fridays with Doria and the replays, and you just sign up for any program and you have access to the replays. You will see, I think we had you on twice, Jason, talking about quantum energy. And those are very popular in our platform. So once you begin to understand quantum energy, you begin to understand generalized principles, you begin to understand laws like the law of exchange. Now you have a toolbox. You have under your wings, you have this wind of knowledge. You have tools that have worked for many. You have what really, really works. And I don't mean to offend you, but most human beings are like babies that get very excited about that mobile above their crib. Like they get really interested in that. And most of us, until we really begin to work on our self-mastery and begin to have an understanding of the world as it really happens, we get all distracted and excited by all these things that will take you off your big, hairy, audacious goal, which reminds me of one of my favorite business books called Good to Great. It's an old book. It's about 20 years old. Good to Great by Jim Collins. He's the one that put on the map big, audacious, hairy goal. And the three circles that he teaches, what do your customers rave about? If you talk to Jason, my other Money and You graduates, they love Money and You. What is it that you are passionate about? That you get up in the morning and you're just like, yes, I'm going to get up. Like this morning, I was so excited. Yay, today I get to with Skylar and with Jason. I'm going to be on their show. I get to connect. I was so excited. And then the last one is creating an economic engine. That's the guy that put those two major words in our language as we know it today. So an economic engine. So many of you are not spending enough time on income generating activities, which is Now Money Now. Our beautiful Bernie Dorman, CEO Space, our angel friend, who's no longer with us. He talked about Now Money Now. That's your survival money. That's the money that you need today. Then you have leverage money. That's future. Are you creating leverage? Are you creating this business that can turn into a platform, that can turn into a movement? So it's this holistic picture. I have to tell you that it wasn't easy. And there's a great video that I must put up in my Facebook. I must remember so that when you go to my Facebook, you will see it, with this gentleman that runs, it's only a minute and a half, and runs this technology company. And it's $1.3 trillion company, 1.5 minutes. And he talks about entrepreneurship is the hardest thing to do. He said if he had known, he would have never become an entrepreneur. So you need to understand that when we talk about my life, when I decided to go see Fidel Castro, the gentleman that took us, it's a long story, but he came into the airplane between San Diego and Florida. And he says, I just need to let you know that there are no diplomatic relationships between the United States and Cuba. But there's airplanes that go back and forth all the time, not to worry about it. But there is a chance that the State Department, because I am the one that invited you to see Castro, that when you come back, you're going to be arrested and it will be a felony for traveling to Cuba. And I am richer than God. He was very rich. In the 50s, he managed $600 million, which would have been an outrageous amount of, billions and billions and billions right now, probably 100 billion. It was so much money in the 50s. He was the richest socialist on the planet. Long story. He says, but don't worry about it because I will pay for all your attorney's fees and I will take care of you. I will pay for the bail, but pretty much you will be taken into a federal prison and be charged with a felony. He says, you need to know that that's the risk when you get on that airplane to Havana tomorrow. Okay. If you don't think that was the scariest thing on the planet, I have never, ever got in trouble with the law. It's not something that I do. And I came from the criminal court system. I'm 34 years old. And it's like, holy mother of God. I was like, and then he goes back to his first class seat. I'm sitting in the back of the plane. And he was like, okay, now let me think about this. And then this peace came over me, and it was this: God would never put me in this situation if it wasn't the most highest good that I can do right now. And it was scary. I was so shocked. We get to Florida, sleep overnight in the hotel, get to the airport in Miami. There's 1,000 flights between Havana. People were going back and forth every hour. Everybody's doing business in Havana and back and forth. I go, well, this looks better. This looks better. Okay. A lot of people are going. It was a small airplane. But when we got there, not only are we escorted by military people with big guns, because we are VIPs from America, and we're going to go see El Comandante, and then they take us to the back of this building and take our passports and give us a little tiny slip of paper that shows us. By then, it was too late. I was already in Havana and I already surrendered my passport. Yeah. But 4 days later, there were so many moments that were so scary. So I want you to know that it's not easy, but you will find the strength to go through all of this.
Yep. Yeah. I 100% agree. The only time I've ever had my passport taken was in Bolivia. And that was a horrible, horrible experience, but for the right reason. I was on a project to work on something,
Yes.
and we were there, and we kind of got there illegally, but we didn't get there legally because the person never stamped our passport because they were running a scam at the border. So when we crossed over, the moment we crossed over, they took all of the Americans and put us in jail, and then just basically held us ransom. So we had to give all our money and everything away, but we eventually were fine. You know, like we came back, and the people that weren't Americans that were with us gave all the money, and we supported, and we created this like mutual fund, and then we continued our project, finished what we came for, and then got back. But it was one of those things where it was like, okay, I'm in this moment where all of the horrible things can happen. Also, did I do anything that led to this moment that I wasn't supposed to do? No? Okay, then I'll be fine. And so there's that freedom in that faith that's like, okay, this is the seat that I'm meant to be in right now. You know, the first time that I went to prison was the same exact experience. I was like, okay, God, I don't know why I'm here. I didn't do anything illegal, really. I ate chocolate, so that's kind of strange. But okay, I'm gonna go for it. We're gonna go to jail. We're gonna go experience what happens here, and then I ended up helping heal somebody, right? And it was just one of those things where we get asked to go into places as entrepreneurs that no one would ever go. And that's why I say, like, you're a true entrepreneur, you've been through it. I don't know an entrepreneur, a real one, that's actually successful that hasn't lived. It's
Yes.
like an accelerated learning course. You know what I mean? Like, oh, okay, cool. I'm here to do God's work on this planet. Let's see what happens. Oh, okay, cool. Well, currently that planet's not owned by the force that you want to work towards. It's actually designed. It's an experiment that you're in right now, and it's going to be a little chaotic. You're like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? And then you get to experience it, and then you get to the end of it, and you're like, wow, that was actually a really good life. Like, I'm glad that I came early. Glad that I experienced what I experienced, and also now I'm really looking forward to partnering and working with everybody to create a better future. And that's part of what this whole program is about, is we're melting away those frozen parts of us because we've all experienced some form of trauma. In the last few years alone, we've experienced the very first global trauma in a long, long time, and with more media and more awareness on it than we've ever had. We experienced panic and shock and dread on levels we didn't even know. For many of us, we weren't even allowed to leave our own houses. Like, it was a crazy experience that caused our brain to freeze. We got a brain freeze and we didn't even get a Slurpee. Like, I mean, that's just not fair. And yet, that's life. And so here we are doing these talks, sharing these things. I'm so, so grateful for you and the time that you were able to give today to really bring your story out and to show people, like, hey, things happen. Also, you get to let those things happen to you or for you. And your entire story of how you got to where you are today is you chose the latter. You chose to let things happen for you and to propel you forward. And you learned leverage and you learned all these concepts. And for anyone out there that hasn't taken money in you, it's highly, 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 highly recommended. It is a life-changing opportunity for you if you show up and you're willing. If you show up and you're like, and you don't fully commit to it, it's different. But the thing that's cool about money and you in life is the same thing. If you show up and you're fully committed to life, what you will have is the greatest life you've ever lived. Because all the lives that led you to this life were to prepare you for this life. So stop living in the past. Stop using references of who you thought you used to be. Be who you are today. Open up the box of life and go play. Thank you so much, Doria, for being here
Oh,
today.
Jason, I forgot to say the best part of it, just to complete the Cuban story. Actually, we came back, got our passport back, came back. Nobody was there to arrest. It was a beautiful trip. And the fun part about it is that my phones were tapped for about 2 or 3 years. You could hear the clickly.
Of
And
course.
the most fun part of it was like I would just repeat the story over and over again. I would say hello to the people that were, that were on the phone. And I would say, good morning, boys. Okay, today I'm meeting with so-and-so. I'm being interviewed. I'm going to tell you every story. Finally, I made a joke into it. I said, I bored them to death. I just told the story over and every single step of the trip. And when I went to get my global entry card, and and a couple of other times when governments had checked me, the guy's eyes went up and it was, like, whoa. And I said, are you reading the Castro story? He goes, you really saw Fidel Castro? And our whole interview was about my trip to Castro. So it turned out to be a really good thing on courage, but it all turned out well. So thank you, God, for that. And thank you, all of you. Hey, you're my leverage. You go do good so that I can retire and just go to the Maui beaches. Okay. I
I will
love
do
you.
that indeed. All right. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here today. It's always an honor and a privilege to play. And I look forward to seeing you in LA soon. Have a blessed, beautiful
Aloha.
everyone. Bye.